morning, good afternoon, good evening. Welcome to Late Night Learning. I am your host, Dr. Anthony Palumba. Now today we're going to be covering the movie business industry. This industry is fairly complex because there are a lot of things that are currently going on. In particular, shifting paradigms within the movie platform sect of the movie industry. And what I mean by that is right now there's been this dialogue between movie studios and movie theaters and internally between both camps and kind of looking at, well, where should movies debut in the future? And this is really within the context of streaming video on demand services, otherwise known as SVOD. They've interrupted the marketplace for television, as we know, but they've also interrupted the marketplace for movies. Variety magazine had an article out recently that stated that more and more thrillers and horror movies are finding their way onto SVOD services. And so the question really becomes, why should horror movies push to debut in movie theaters in the future? Should they at all? Is it more beneficial to the movie itself to debut on a personalized platform rather than a group platform like the movie theater itself? Movie theaters have been stock full of superhero movies and other blockbusters. And so movie theaters seem to be glacially gravitating toward being more of an experiential place. Now, it's always been the case that when you and I go to the movie theaters, it is an experience. But now that we have all of these platforms available and movie studios are pushing further and further to capitalize on hype and buzz around a movie, it's kind of important to think about alternative business strategies. If we think about the hype around Joker, which was back in October, which was only about a month ago, that's already done. So Joker, as much hype as that movie had, and it broke box office records for its opening box office in October, and it set a few other records as well, it's already been forgotten to a large extent in movie theaters. Certainly it is up for Oscar nomination. Certainly it's going to continue to be talked about for quite some time. But since there are so many movies that debut, its hype has already kind of been exhausted. And so movie studios need to kind of think about, well, how can we quickly exploit and capitalize upon the amount of hype and buzz that we have? Because it depreciates over time, right? It doesn't appreciate over time. The buzz that Joker cultivated before the movie debuted was finite and was at its peak, right? You really can't sustain the peak of buzz or hype the week before a movie debuts. The best you can do is hope that everybody sees it. Well, it makes more sense to try to debut these movies across multiple platforms at the same time. But this strikes fear in the hearts of many movie theater executives because it does impinge upon their windows. Now, a movie typically can be exhibited for about 90 days. Usually it's about 60 days at this point. Movie studios have been pushing for shorter and shorter windows. And so movie theater executives need to think about, well, what are some alternative ways that we can raise revenue because our windows may be diminishing. And so movie theater executives have actually been pretty innovative in what they've been able to do. And if you visited movie theaters in the last 5 years or so, you've probably noticed a shift. One being the plushy seats that we have now in a lot of movie theaters. It does definitely feel like an experience. It feels as though you're kind of in a more of a luxurious setting. Additionally, the food and beverages and other accoutrements that are offered at the movie theater have really been beefed up. They've been enhanced. Alcohol now is sold, gourmet food is now sold at particular movie theater chains, and alcohol has now displaced popcorn as the highest revenue gaining food / beverage for movie theaters. And so a lot of these changes really are kind of hearkening this notion that the movie theater business and movie business is changing. But I should caution you, I don't believe the movie theater industry is going away anytime soon. I don't think that the movie theater industry is going to dissolve anytime soon. I just think it's changing. And hopefully you've seen that theme interwoven through all of the lectures that I've offered here. Items in entertainment and media shift, they change, they mutate. They have alternate derivations, but ultimately everything tends to remain intact. So as we're thinking about movie theaters and the movie business itself and where are things going, I do think people will still see movies in the future in theaters, but it will be different. I think that this notion that any movie worth its weight in gold, any movie that boasts high quality has to debut in a movie theater, I think that notion is beginning to erode. And it's against this kind of technological boom that's gone on, that's really served as a corrosive agent in dissolving that notion and demonstrating that top-notch movies can really debut anywhere. And so we have to start thinking about, well, where do audiences want to see what movie genre at what platform? I'm actually currently doing research on this because ultimately that's going to be able to give directors and creatives a better sense of how people will appreciate their movies. It'll also help movie theaters really focus in on the select movies that make it into their movie theaters as well. So I actually do believe that it is a win-win for both sides that are involved in construing this business. So let's get started with the rest of the lecture. And so an international glance at the movie theater industry. So I kind of gave you a foundation about what movie theaters are facing, what movie studios are facing, typical business questions that have to be met. The movie theater industry is based around the movie studio industry. And the Motion Picture Association of America oversees the entire movie business. This is the representing agent in Washington. It is the lobbying firm, if you will, for the movie industry. It helps regulate the movie industry as well. It puts policies in place, in particular with anti-piracy legislation, and also kind of looking over tax incentive laws and other things that are germane to the movie business industry. And so the movie industry is responsible for raising and supporting finances in locations around the world. This is why, in part, the movie industry is so reveled and appreciated and lauded, because it does provide a lot of exposure for a lot of locations, depending upon where a movie may be filmed. Numerous tax incentive laws are passed in locations around the world. That cannot be overstated. Tax incentives are absolutely crucial to the movie making industry. It has made and broken locations, but tax incentives in Louisiana, in Georgia, have really expanded the movie making industry beyond California and beyond exotic locations. $139 billion are paid in wages to employees that are a part of the movie industry. It enlists more than 93 businesses, resulting in about $134 billion in sales. And so restaurants, hotels, a lot of locations, local businesses that are around a particular movie that is being made in a location really do benefit here from the movie being made. $49 billion are paid to local businesses. Some 400,000 local businesses benefit from movies being filmed on location. And so a big portion of the movie making business does depend upon where something is being filmed. And there are a lot of moving pieces that are invested here in seeing the movie successfully made. A lot of stakeholders, not only surrounding the movie itself, but also locals who are impacted by, having 2,000-3,000 movie employees, including actors and actresses and the creatives involved, making the movie in their backyard. Let's keep going. So at a glance, if we look at movie audiences, there are a bevy of movies that are distributed each year, but also, those who frequently consume movies really do comprise about half of the movie-going population. So that's important to note here. Generally speaking, there are about 450 movies that are released per year domestically in North America. I believe globally it's about 500 to 700 per year, and that does vary. Frequent moviegoers. These are people who attend at least once a month they go to movie theaters. It does consist of about 12% of the US Canada population. It's about 43 million, but they do account for about 50% of tickets sold. So the people that you see in a movie theater, half of them go at least once a month. And so this is certainly an activity that has a core membership. The average number of times a person will go to the cinema was greatest among 12 to 17 and 19 to 24-year-olds, about 5.1 per year. And among races and ethnicities, among Hispanics, 4.7 times per year, Asians, 4.5 times per year. And so very quickly, we're able to kind of create this consumer profile of people who typically go to the movie theaters. Isn't to say Caucasians don't go, isn't to say older Caucasians don't go, but when you know that people who attend movie theaters tend to be younger in nature, and that there are particular minorities that will populate movie theaters more so than others, these data points are very, very important for movie theaters who are trying to determine which movies they need to show, perhaps how many screens per movie, and really for the movie studios as well. You need to understand who is going to come see your latest blockbuster, if that's what you're trying to push in a movie theater, versus a rom-com, versus a horror movie or a thriller for that matter. Let's keep going. So if we're going to kind of break down the box office, as I've alluded to this earlier, it's important here to get a sense of how valuable the movie making industry is. And so the global total box office was about 41 billion last year. That's generally the case. And generally speaking, you'll also see that about 2/3 of global box office revenue is accrued from international markets. And so here, domestically, North America, the US, Canada, conglomerate, if you will, is usually responsible for about 10 to 12 billion. Last year was about 11.9 billion here. With international box office, we see 29 billion. Tickets sold in the US, Canada, about 1.3 billion. The movie theater industry at this point moves at a glacial pace. Any increase in box office revenue, any increase in amount of tickets sold is very difficult to do. So a 5% uptick in tickets sold is sizable, to be sure. But as you can see here, with box office, be it international, be it domestic, it doesn't really move that much. And so that's generally, due to inflation or something else going on here. Let's keep going. International box office. As we're talking about international box office, I imagine some of you might be thinking about Bollywood, some of you might be thinking about even Japan, and I'm sure some of you even thought about China at this point. And so as you can see here, undoubtedly, China is the top international box office. It's not even close, ladies and gentlemen. Certainly Japan is prominent, as is the UK and South Korea, but France and India. But as you can see here, the Chinese movie market is very, very precious. Something interesting about the Chinese government and how it regulates international movies that are distributed in its own country. It only allows for about 20 to 30 movies per year that are not made by Chinese filmmakers to be debuted in its own country. And so as you can imagine, Hollywood, Bollywood, Anywood are all trying to penetrate that market, because aside from saturating the US market with the Joker or with the Fast and the Furious or whatever else, that secondary market is incredibly valuable. And $9 billion is nothing to sniff at, particularly since the US-Canada conglomerate is responsible for about 10 to 12 billion revenue-wise worldwide. And so it is definitely a market that can really put a movie over the top, so to speak. And as we're talking about costs here, it's important to note that a blockbuster is a movie that not only usually has a lot of money backing it, but also recoups a lot on its investment. A rule of thumb for you, ladies and gentlemen: if a movie costs about $100 million to make, for it to be a success, it generally has to make 200 to 300 million. So generally speaking, 2 to 3 times the amount that it costs. So if it's $10 million, it's a success. If it's made, 20 to 30 million, obviously more is even better, but generally speaking, for executives who have to pay people, have to pay the movie theater that it was exhibited in, and other distributors and other partners involved in the financing of the movie itself, generally speaking, 2 to 3 times the amount of the cost itself means that the movie was a success. Let's keep going. And so here there is nothing to take notes on in particular, but I really enjoyed making these slides. But it is to kind of make a point that the top grossing movies year to year do vacillate between accruing grand international revenue versus global box office revenue. And so here we can see Avengers in 2012, we can see that the foreign box office was significantly higher than the domestic box office. For The Hunger Games: Catching Fire, we can see that it was popular about 50-50. We can see with American Sniper, without question, domestically, it accrued most of its revenue at 64%. We can see with Star Wars: The Force Awakens in 2015. We can see the foreign box office at about 55%, and we can see the domestic box office at about 45%. Let's keep going. Moving on to 2016 through 19, Rogue One, a Star Wars story, clocked in at 64% of its revenue was domestic. For Star Wars, we can see foreign, about 712 billion. And we can see here too, and it should be pointed out, that even with Star Wars, we are seeing that it vacillates between domestic and foreign. Additionally, it hits the billion mark in 2017, in part because it had such a strong showing abroad in international markets. Black Panther also does well here, has about a 50-50 split, and then Avengers Endgame has about a 50-50 split as well. And so it's important to note here that movie executives look at these numbers and they have other metrics and analytics that they are privy to, but they also have to make decisions about future advertising and marketing campaigns. They can see that opening box office weekend, that's one of your biggest indicators about how successful your marketing campaign was, right? The first box office weekend, if you will, does not show or demonstrate or illustrate the integrity of the movie, the strength of the movie, the quality of the movie. All it illustrates is how well your marketing campaign was, right? And then we can see in subsequent weeks, word of mouth factors in here. My brother said this, my sister said that about this movie. I'm really, really pumped. I'm going to go see it. Then those other factors kind of melt into the framework here. But otherwise, the opening box office weekend is absolutely indicative of how well the marketing campaign went. Let's keep going. Movie franchises and brand extensions. So as we're kind of thinking about some of the franchises that we just looked at, Star Wars and the Avengers and Black Panther, some of us may be saying to ourselves, why do we have so many movie franchises? And the film industry does this, as any good brand manager would do in any product category, in looking at how well the brand resonates with consumers and where can we extend the brand. It's meant to reduce perceived risk. It is meant to reduce search cost. If you and I are at the movie theater and we are looking at, the movie theater kiosk or the movie theater queue, if you will, and the movies that are debuting are, The Chair and Scarecrow 7 and Batman, frankly, The Chair, although a horror movie, really doesn't appeal to me that much. Scarecrow 5, I heard Scarecrow 3 was I'm not really familiar with it. I understand it's from South Korea. Batman I'm familiar with. Batman is something that is tangible to me. Batman is something that is visceral to me. Batman is something that I already have expectations. I know what I'm in for. I know what I'm going to get. It's a good investment. I've rarely been disappointed by a Batman movie, and I really don't want to think about this anymore because I've already devoted 30 seconds to it, and the popcorn looks good on the other side of the movie table concession stand. And so, generally speaking, we make these decisions ultimately based around avoiding risk and wanting to have a good time and having a guaranteed good time. And so within the movie industry, this has been capitalized and harvested time and time again because movie executives recognize that many movies do not recoup their costs. Many movies tank, only about a third to year wind up making their revenue back, sometimes even less than that. And so for all of those reasons, it makes sense for movie studio executives to push along and to offer several types of movies that are related to a core intellectual property or a core narrative that everybody's familiar with. Sequels refer to a film whose story continues from or expands upon some earlier work. We also have spin-offs here, a film whose character, topic, or event originates from previous works. So we may have a spin-off movie on The Penguin or a spin-off movie on Catwoman, which Warner Brothers actually did. Remakes is defined as a film that is based on another previous film, and crossovers is a film that is adapted from another type of media, such as a book or a video game or a play for that matter. Let's keep going. Top 10 highest grossing movie franchises of all time. We can see here, by far and away, Marvel. Star Wars is close, so is Harry Potter, but as we can see very quickly, it kind of diminishes across the others. Now, all of these franchises here are very successful, and you'll notice that the franchises that do the best are big blockbusters that tend to be fantasy-oriented. Fast and the Furious is probably a bit more action-oriented. You could argue that with all of the cars flying all over the place, maybe there is a bit of fantasy placed inside some of these movies. But we can also see here X-Men, Spider-Man, Batman, Pirates of the Caribbean, fictional fantastical story, Lord of the Rings as well, Harry Potter, Star Wars, and Marvel. So we can kind of draw a few things from movie audiences. In particular, movie audiences definitely want an escape. They want to be in different worlds. The most successful franchises are franchises that are based around alternate worlds, that are based around some sort of fantasy that is offered for audiences. Even though X-Men, Spider-Man, and Batman tend to occur in reality, these movies do take on fantastical notions of superheroes and superhuman heroes and villains that wage wars and battles against each other. Let's keep going. If we look at the Marvel box office just a bit more here, we can see Black Panther and the Avengers really do make up the bulk of revenue for the Marvel universe here. Let's keep going. So with product placement here, product placement is an important ingredient in the movie making business. Box offices are limited to only ticket sales. We also know that there has been a steep decline in DVD and Blu-ray sales, something along the lines of a decline of about 30% over the last few years, and so movie studios need to think of different ways to accrue revenue. Product placement is absolutely that panacea, that kind of cure for a lot of this. It's usually not obtrusive in a movie. Sometimes it's placed in the background. Sometimes there might be a slight gesture to Coca-Cola, BMW, or whatever it may be. And sometimes the story kind of is furthered along with using a particular brand. And so it could be that, Bruce Wayne is working on an Apple computer or something for that matter. Or, one of the X-Men characters is driving a Honda or BMW, or whatever it may be. And so you can also draw parallels here because you can make these characters appear closer to the audiences. You can make these characters appear as though, they're no different in some respect than some of the audience's members. And so it does add a layer of realism to the movie itself. And I think it does allow for deeper resonation with audiences. And so product placement is also, though, a delicate balance that should be noted here. Too much product placement can lead to skepticism and even interruption here. Product placement in movies has been found to have a strong impact on consumer ratings, but too much of it can lead to negative reviews. That's important to note here. But product placement, especially in movies like James Bond's Tomorrow Never Dies, it reached 100 million. It was able to do this by incorporating Smirnoff, Heineken, Avis, Ericsson, Gateway, BMW, Brioni, Omega, and Visa. Genres in which product placements work best in include humor and romance. And this makes sense, right? You wouldn't really want to have Starbucks as a product placement in a horror movie. I mean, you could, and there could be some sort of irony that is placed there, but it probably doesn't mesh well with the inner workings of the movie itself. We also have here ratings. Ratings are important when we think about product placement because not only are we thinking about which brands are placed, but also who's watching these brands. Where is the consumer purchasing power best at? And it probably is best in our movies if we're thinking about purchasing power, but PG-13 is where most product placement lies. I do believe that this makes sense because PG-13 movies will still attract a vastly adult audience for the most part, and it's more of an expansive audience as well. Brand extension movies place fewer brands than non-brand extension movies. So this means that you're likely to see more brand placement in a movie that is new rather than Batman 3 or rather than Batman 2. I also think at this point, if you have a franchise or spin-offs or anything like that, it may appear as tacky to audiences. And these franchises are usually very successful, and so they don't necessarily need more help, so to speak. Paramount Pictures has been found to have the most product placement from 2002 to 2012, and consumers 16 to 34 are most likely to note product placement and be interested in trying the product itself. And so as you can see here, what I was alluding to earlier is the R rating is probably best for finding the audiences that will act upon product placement because of the purchasing power. But PG-13 does allow for a greater audience to come in, and that's ultimately one of the overwhelming Paramount concerns that movie studio executives will have here. And so the movie industry itself is remarkably complex. You can even see it here in part one of this lecture that there are a lot of moving pieces here. Product placement has to be thought about even more now because DVD, Blu-ray sales are kind of dissipating. Also, if your movie debuts on Netflix or Hulu, it's not going to go to pay cable, right? It's not going to go to pay-per-view. It's not going to be going into a movie theater and then going to pay cable, or going to a movie theater and then going to DVD, Blu-ray, and then going to pay-per-view and then going to cable. It's not going into these individual windows anymore, right? We know this with movies that have debuted on Netflix and Hulu. So if you're Warner Brothers and you don't have these windows, you have to think about other potential revenue streams. And so in part two, we're going to get further into this complex industry. But that's all the time we have on Late Night Learning. As always, keep laughing and keep learning.